Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the highlights of FMX 1994 till 2020. My name is Anna-Katharina Brinkschulte, and I'm your host today. Besides that, I'm the senior lecturer at Film Academy's Animationsinstitut, where I serve as the head of the subject area Interactive Media. Sadly, this year's FMX couldn't take place in Stuttgart at the beginning of May, just 2 weeks ago, for the very first time in 25 years, because of the COVID-19 pandemic situation. But to keep you updated with upcoming technological trends, give you insights in great immersive stories, and to stay in contact with all the highly talented people out there like you guys, the FMX team has organized a new format for you. A series of interviews bi-weekly till the end of the year. And we are really excited to have all of you join us tonight for our online show. But please note, to avoid background noises, we have muted all of your microphone signals. But this shouldn't stop you from asking questions. Please type them in via the chat function, and we are happy to pass your questions over to our guest. Welcome, Gayatri Parameswaran.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, where are you at the moment? How are you?
I'm doing well. I am in Berlin at the moment, and where I'm based. So yeah, just in the studio in the office, and working on. Things are going fine. It's been a little bit of getting used to the whole COVID situation, of course, as everyone else.
Yes.
And it's been some reorganizing, but things are moving back to normal as much as they can for now.
Things turned upside down, actually. But before heading into the topic right now on, just wanted to present you and give a little introduction who you are. So Gayatri is a VR creator and a co-founder at Now Here Media, an immersive storytelling studio in Berlin. Gayatri and the team at Now Here Media are using immersive technologies to create experiences to take you to the heart of their stories. They explore on topics such as war, human rights issues, and conflicts and the environment. Her work has been exhibited at the Venice International Film Festival, South by Southwest, and the United Nations, just to name some of the places worldwide. They believe, I read on the website, in the power of stories to transform. And I think really this is a great sentence to say just what we want to talk about today for VR for a social impact, to transform something, to give it an impact. So this is the reason why I'm very happy to have you here today, Gayatri, to dive deeper into different realities, get some insights about your new project, and a discussion about modern journalism. So, Gayatri, we have prepared a little trailer with some snippets of your last year's FMX attendance so that your audience can get to know you a little better. So, no to say, spotlight on Gayatri Parameswaran.
Young people in India are finding it hard to distinguish violence in the relationship or control in the relationship from love. So our job was to design an experience specifically for the younger audiences in India to educate them about this. We designed the experience, and in the experience you step into the shoes of a younger woman who is in a relationship that is controlling, and it goes through several scenarios. And we knew that, once again, VR is not the most democratic medium, so where are we going to meet these people? Most of the young people in urban centers take public transport. And we wanted to plan our launch in Delhi, and we struck a partnership with the Delhi Public Transport. So we set up booths or installation booths at 3 train stations for 10 days. And that got us 5,000 people viewing the experience. And anyone who's working with VR knows that 5,000 people over 10 days is a big number. And of course, we would tell them what it was about and warm them enough and see if they wanted to see it. But most people were fascinated by VR being this new thing, and there were queues and there were ways to, that was a good way to reach them. Yeah, I think it's really, if you have the intention, it's definitely possible to do things in a way that's, fair and equitable and diverse.
When you see children in areas of war or conflict, and then you come back and you see children in the cities that you live in, I think that's when it hits you the hardest. The realities are very different. Their futures are going to be different. And what are we doing to kind of make sure that their futures can, to bridge the gap? We are not telling enough of these stories. The way that our world is structured is that their stories just don't have as much of a space, or they don't find the space in our mediatized world. And I'm always happy to be part of a community that is working towards bridging also this gap, making voices that are normally unheard heard, to kind of facilitate this dialogue as well. For instance, in Home After War, which is the story of an Iraqi father who lost 2 sons to an IED or an improvised explosive device. This is unfortunately, this is a really classical post-conflict story. And it's hard because this is not sexy. So that is hard to do as a journalist or a filmmaker or a creator, is to speak about how do you make topics that are not sexy. And that's where I think technology can play a role. If you're able to give people insights in a way that they've never experienced before, such as using photogrammetry to take audiences to places they've never been before and they will never go in their lives. Bring them closer, have them have an encounter with someone from somewhere else and in another part of the world. That's going to build a kind of empathy, and at least that's the hope, that that's going to bring people closer together to each other.
So I hope all of you know now a little bit more about Gayatri and her wonderful work she's doing to get people closer together. So, as you said in the last sentence of your little trailer, you said you want to bring people closer together. And I suppose you just meant in a more closer in an emotional way. But I thought also, like, under this special circumstances at the moment, can think about it as we can interpret it more widely. And thinking about, like, today, we have been living the last 8 weeks under social distancing. So the gap between people is growing bigger, and the gap physically, obviously, but also in the opportunities. And how can technology help to bridge the gap in between? And yeah, could it help? I think it could, but what would you say? How is your experience with technologies, and what do we learn in a society, as a modern society? How should we use it?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question. And currently, actually, a lot of us are able to kind of understand what it means to not have the means to go somewhere or to go to places that we plan to go to. A lot of us, are not even fortunate enough to plan a trip somewhere and to go somewhere. So we're getting a taste of what would a world be like if we didn't have the means to move around. And I think technology right now, and we are seeing that happen right now very well, that technology can play a role. It won't replace what existed in its place. So I think, we are talking about FMX right now, and we are talking on FMX right now. FMX as this virtual space. FMX as this virtual space will not replace the FMX that's in the real world. So we shouldn't even try to do that. I think because if we try to replace the what exists in the real world with the virtual world, we will just be frustrated because it won't actually end up replacing those things, which are beautiful in their own sense. But on the other hand, if we can use the virtual to do it, to try and see what the strengths are of virtual. I mean, in this case, the strengths of the virtual, in a very broad sense, or the strengths of the technology is to broadcast to a much larger audience than the one that could access the festival or the conference in Stuttgart in person. So I think those are the things. I mean, the in-person contact, the coffee breaks are not going to be replaced in this virtual edition of the festival. But what's possible is to reach a much larger audience. And I think if we see what the strengths are in each of these cases of using technology and why we are using technology and what technology can serve, I think we'll find answers.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning out that the FMX isn't the same if it's not happening in Stuttgart. We are really sorry for that one too. For actually, FMX is more about having a networking space, have an area, meeting people together. So we hope to get all of you guys out there together now in a virtual space. So just use the chat function as mentioned before and take the chance to get a network and to get a discussion up running. So, but as you said, the VR world or virtual world couldn't replace the real world. But with the project Home After War, which have you presented last year at FMX, you did it in some kind of a way because you used photogrammetry to really rebuild a real life setting into a virtual world. So how was it going?
So basically, I think when we started thinking of the project and the issue that we were tackling, so Home After War is a virtual reality experience that is meant to raise awareness of the problems of improvised explosive devices in areas of conflict and in areas of post-conflict. And we looked at Iraq with this project. And one thing that our research showed very clearly was that there were a lot of booby traps or explosive devices that were left behind in the form of booby traps that were affecting civilians. So a refugee or an internally displaced person would come back home and they would want to open, the gate to their home, and that could set off an explosion. Or you might want to turn off the electricity in your home, and that might trigger an explosion. So home as a space became unsafe in itself and insecure. And for me and for a lot of people around the world, home is a secure space. And so we realized that the space was really important in telling the story. And virtual reality is a really good tool for spatial storytelling. And that's why we used VR to tell this story. And basically also to see how to transport people to another space and to another place that might feel real and realistic enough. And in that, we found the answer in photogrammetry as a technique. To use photogrammetry and photorealistic representation of a space where I had been, for instance, to a larger audience was something that was very, very exciting and interesting to explore and challenging as well. But yeah.
Let's talk about the challenges later on. But just while we are talking, it was really a great experience and really it catched me really, really deep. But I think not everybody might have had a chance to experience it by themselves. So let's share a short trailer about the project so everybody get a glimpse at what the project looks like. So please, trailer of Home After War up.
You know, our house is our home. When ISIS came here, I heard fighting between them and the security forces. Bombs were falling from planes. we took the car and fled. We said that we are going home even if that meant we had to live on the rubble, because we were fed up with being strangers. We heard that there were houses where the electricity was booby-trapped. If you see a bomb, you would usually recognize it. But this stuff is new. They were my wings.
Wow, I'm always kind of still touch remembering what I have experienced and just in VR, but you really created a totally immersive environment when stepping into and got the feeling of being there. So, but I thought about how was it for you being really there in a war zone? How have you prepared for doing the shooting?
Yeah, so basically my background is in war and conflict reporting. So that's what I'm trained to do. So I'm trained to work in hostile environments. And of course I wouldn't recommend anyone who's not trained to do that to actually go into a place that is hostile or unsafe or an area of conflict. So I think it was basically it's what they say about working in areas of conflict is to always it's hard to assess the risk and to perceive the risk. So on day one, you will be following all the rules that you've been asked to follow. You will go back home at 6 p.m. or to the hotel at 6 p.m. and say, okay, we call it a night, and we wake up and follow the rules, where to go, where not to go, be safe. You might say, oh, on the first day I followed all the rules and nothing happened. So you might and say, okay, today I will stay out until 6:15 and 6:30 and see what happens. And then you might on the third day say, oh, yesterday I was out until 6:30 p.m. and nothing happened. So maybe today I can be out until 7 p.m. So with the problem in being problems of being in an area or a place of conflict sometimes is to not have a realistic understanding of what your risk is. Basically, I think you always need to write it down somewhere what the rules are on based on your intelligence, based on the people around you who are informing you. What are the lines that you must not draw? And be sure not to cross those lines at any point, because that's how most people get into danger, when you become complacent and you're not sure anymore of how to judge a risky situation.
And at the moment, already the first questions have been popping into our chat. And Andrea Secade asks, why did you first decide to work in areas of conflict?
Actually, it was something that happened. It was an event very early in my career, or as a student. Actually, I was in Kashmir. I grew up in India. I studied in India, in Bombay, and as part of a college or a university trip, we were visiting Kashmir. For those of you who don't know much about Kashmir, it's an area that is occupied by the Indian forces. It's one of the highest militarized, most militarized areas in the world, actually. For every Kashmiri, for every 13 Kashmiris, there is an Indian soldier. So if you it's more militarized than a lot of other places in the world that we think are, if you compare it to West Bank or Gaza. It's more militarized than that. And when I was there, we visited a group, as a group of students, we visited the university in Kashmir and actually firsthand got to hear what civilians there were undergoing on an everyday basis. And it's similar to all occupations once again. And that's also the moment that I realized that, oh, wait a second, the Indian media is actually not reporting what's happening there from this perspective at all. These are the voices we are not hearing at all. And that's the moment when I realized that there is such an inherent bias in the media when it comes to what gets reported and what's not. And normally these are power games. It depends who's owning the media, who has control of the media, and who is in power, basically. And those without power are always are not given the preference or not given the platform to raise their voice. So that's the moment, as an idealistic 18-year-old, I thought, okay, I want to do what I can to represent those who don't often get represented in these media landscapes, and to create a platform or to create a space where this can be represented as well. Very well recognizing that I'm not doing it because I'm better at it. I'm just doing it because I have the privilege and the access to these to these spaces that can broadcast these voices. So yeah, and then I studied war and conflict journalism, and then my first assignment was in Myanmar as an undercover journalist, and then it went on, and then I carried on to report from a lot of other areas of conflict, including Syria during the war and Iraq, and yeah, but it's always been kind of looking at the civilian side of the conflict and not as much the militarized conflict. I don't really care what's happening as much on the front line, who has control of what. That's not something that excites me. It's more what happens way behind, far away from these front lines and far away from where the guns are making noises and the shellings, to see how are civilians actually affected in these times.
Wow, impressive background, actually. Not a typical choice to report in this critical areas and zones. For actually, you're a risk for your life too, and you have to be quite brave showing off that. And thank you for doing that, to risk your life actually to give the people a voice. And the possibility for us to hear that voices and to do something and have an impact on that too. Thank you for doing that. This is really, really important, and I'm glad having you here and having now a chance to give you a voice to all the people now out there, to see your projects and to get them know better. So thinking about the impact you had, just skipping back to Home After War, because it's a real great project and had an impact. You said you sent us over a reaction video of people just right after the experience they had, and I wanted to share with all of you guys by now, just to see how people really felt it and what kind of empathy they got out to, because it's something I can't describe with my words, and I guess it's better to hear it from their side.
So real. Like, you cannot replicate this through like PowerPoint slides or a chalkboard or note cards. And for me, it was real.
I will grab everybody I can possibly get to come and see it. And I only wish, as a teacher, that my students could all experience that, because I think if they could, they would see things in a whole new light.
To actually be in those spaces and to physically be there and emotionally be there is yeah, I've never experienced anything like it. I mean,
really, really clever way to just, shake you a little bit and make you realize that, I mean, it's probably the closest we're ever going to come to being able to actually experience what it's like, and I thought it was a really clever way of doing it.
Oh, it was really, really powerful. I mean, I kind of could have imagined what could have been inside, but being inside and feeling and living this experience is just amazing. Actually, kind of, I'm speechless.
In a force.
Stop waging war and peace to the world.
Yeah, this should give you a short glimpse about how it was to experience a situation and to experience your VR experience, just to keep this word up to about experiencing everything. But what I like the most about is you're saying you're doing that for giving this voices a place and in space and an area for having an impact. And you have a cooperation with the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining. And that's great because you're working together with partners to really get on point where the action is needed. Could you tell us a bit more about this cooperation?
Yeah, sure. So we partnered with the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining as part of for this project, and it was a really great match for doing what we were doing. This partnership, actually, one thing you need to realize as a creator, as a filmmaker, as an artist or a storyteller is that you do not have the means to reach all the spaces that you want to reach in order to have impact or to reach all kinds of audiences. Because of our partnership with this nonprofit, the nonprofit is one of the leading nonprofits working in this space when it comes to demining. And they have the right connections to the right people when it comes to, changing things on the ground. With the help of this partnership, we were able to exhibit the piece 3 times at the United Nations, once in New York and twice in Geneva. And all these 3 exhibitions happened around a time when there were important meetings happening in the industry of demining and mine action. As a result, we could get stakeholders, policymakers, and important decision makers into the headset to view the piece during these conferences. And sometimes I realized in the course of this project, I realized that sometimes in order to have an impact, you need to reinforce people who are working in the space, experts who are working in the space. You need to let them know that they're doing a great job and what they're doing matters. Because sometimes they just need one more reason to do what they're doing. So that was the goal of this, also to kind of try and push the existing mine action landscape, like whatever was happening in the mine action community, to kind of help them continue doing what they do with much more impact in the region. Especially in the Middle East, in Iraq and in Syria, in the conflict that's ongoing and also going on into the post-conflict phase in the coming years. So that's the kind of impact that we could achieve only by co-creating this piece with this nonprofit, with a partner that knows the area and knows the space that's that we're talking about. And for each of our pieces, we actually do identify partners we co-create with. So this might be a community, this might be sometimes it's just the target audience that you co-create with. Sometimes it really depends on the project. So it's co-creation is really at the basis of everything that we do.
This leads me over to a question which came up from Maria just right at the beginning at our session. She asked about, or she questioned if VR technologies are not yet accessible to so many people at the moment by now, and for having a great impact in society, if you plan to do your projects more in a transmedia way.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Maria. I do think that virtual reality is not a very accessible medium, and therefore needs to be viewed as such. It's just not accessible, and most people won't be able to see it. And we try our best to get these pieces out to public spaces such as museums, such as public installations, sometimes just on the street, or other areas where like the normal person can view these pieces of work. But we've realized more and more that we need to also kind of democratize this information, and for example, for two of our upcoming projects, we have simple, plain, flat videos that also speak about the subject in the same way, for those people who cannot get access or get their hands onto onto a headset.
Well, you just pointed it out, your next new projects. So the next new project you're working on is called Kusunda. Now, where you work in a totally different field of a topic, with your project, you fight against the extinction of an indigenous language. So sounds pretty interesting, but totally different direction. Where came the idea from to work with that? Or is it something you want to tell us in our presentation you prepared?
Sure, I can run you through what this project is, and also hopefully touch upon where the project started and how, like, the genesis of this project as well. Kusunda, Speak the Unspoken, as Anna said, is a virtual reality experience that explores what it means to lose a language and what it takes to preserve one. Just to clarify, Kusunda is the name of an indigenous community or an indigenous group in Nepal, in the west of Nepal. And it's also the name of this language that this group speaks. In this virtual reality experience, you meet two of our co-creators of this project, or two protagonists. One of them is Lil Bahadur Kusunda, and he is 86 years old, and he is a shaman, a Kusunda shaman. If you go up to his village, you have to ask the people to directions to where the king lives. So he lives on top of the hills, and he's a very hospitable man, and he lived in the forest for the first 40 years of his life as part of this hunter-gatherer community. And unfortunately, when he settled in the village, he forgot his language because he stopped speaking his language in order to integrate into the mainstream, into the village life. And that happened because he met his wife in the village, and his wife did not want to live this nomadic kind of life that he was living. So as a result of love and falling in love and wanting to have a married life, he gave up his traditional way of life and settled in the village. And in the course of this process, he forgot his language. And this is something quite typical that happens to a language, is that often languages go extinct not with a bang, but they go extinct in silence, because people stop speaking it for various reasons. Another main co-creator involved in this piece is Hema, and Hema is Lil Bahadur's granddaughter, and she represents a modern identity, a modern Kusunda identity, wherein she realizes that she hasn't spent her life like her grandparents in the forest, or her ancestors in the forest, living this traditional life. However, she is making serious efforts to learn the language that her grandfather forgot, and in order to revive this language. And to this day, there are only about very few, maybe two or three, a handful of fluent Kusunda speakers, and Hema represents the next generation of Kusunda, of the Kusunda community that wants to keep the language alive. Yeah, and she's 15, and in her age, she's doing some remarkable things. And I think when I was 15, I had very different priorities. So I really am very impressed by Hema and her, her efforts. A little bit about the Kusunda people. As I mentioned, traditionally they were a hunter-gatherer community until about even 30 to 40 years ago. That was the last, along with Lil Bahadur, the last group of Kusunda people stopped living in the forest, their kind of traditional semi-nomadic lives. And there are currently only about 150 people in Nepal who identify as Kusunda. So it's a small indigenous minority, and the language itself is considered to be moribund, which means by UNESCO, which means that it's on the verge of extinction. And unfortunately, Kusunda is not the only language that is facing extinction. Nearly 50% of the world's languages are endangered, and every 2 weeks, a language falls silent. And that's that's really, really, really shocking to me. I speak about 6 languages, and I know that I can only say certain things in certain languages. So, for example, my mother tongue is Tamil, and in Tamil you don't ask how are you when you meet someone. A lot of the times you just ask have you eaten, and have you eaten is a way to kind of find out, is everything okay? If you've eaten, then maybe everything is okay, and if you haven't eaten, maybe we need to figure out what's happening. So yeah, I always make fun of my mom as well, whenever, no matter where in the world I am or what I'm doing, whenever she calls me, her first question is like, have you eaten? Yeah, and one more really important thing when it comes to this phenomenon of extinction of languages is that it's related to the extinction of biodiversity. I don't need to say this, but all of us here probably know that we are facing this 6th mass extinction currently. And this 6th mass extinction of species and biodiversity is caused, what's different about this 6th mass extinction than the other 5 mass extinctions is that it's caused by human activity, and we know that. And in other words, how we call it is climate change, right? And when you look at that map and you see the extinction of languages on this map, that map correlates very strongly with the extinction of biodiversity. So it means that the people who, like these areas that are under danger or threatened by biodiversity extinction are also the places that are threatened by extinction of their culture. And a lot of the times, of course, these are areas that are often inhabited by indigenous people and indigenous groups. So it's, and I think what's really important here is also right now to notice that we are, only beginning to understand the importance of indigenous knowledge when it comes to tackling climate change and when it comes to tackling human activities that are causing climate change, and the wealth of knowledge that can contribute to actually combating that. Yeah, as Chomsky says, therefore, I think language is not just a collection of words or a vocabulary or its grammar. It's something that ties a community together and it brings people together. So it's also something that forms an identity, and that's why it's very, very important. For instance, in the Kusunda language, there is no word for green. because green is the default color in the forests. So it would be as though we had a color to describe air, and we don't do that. So these are the small things that help us understand a worldview from a certain perspective, and often a language is our window into this worldview. So when a language disappears, we also lose this way of looking at the world. And yeah, something really somber at this point I want to bring up. Anna asked, how did you start this process of this project? The project started, probably the ideas for this project started way back in 2012, when me and my co-creator Felix, we first met this beautiful woman, Ganymede Sen. She was one of the last speakers of this language, and very, very inspiring. At the time, I was a journalist doing TV and radio reports. When we first met, we always said that we have to do something longer, something bigger, something more, something that could go beyond this short journalistic feature that we'd accomplished. And over the course of the last 7 years or so, Ganymede also became very, very involved in saving this language and trying to hand it further to the next generation, to hand it over and to give it another life. She became a teacher and a sort of an activist. And initially, Kusunda was going to be a project together with Ganymede Sen about her life and her efforts. But unfortunately, earlier this January, on the 25th of January, when just before we were kind of taking our flight to go to Nepal and start the work on the VR piece, we had filmed a lot with her in non-VR and kind of in flat. She passed away. She had been suffering from a lung infection for a couple of weeks, and she went to the hospital and she didn't survive. So it was a huge blow for us. And I think it kind of made us also think how important this whole undertaking is and how sensitive it is. We were working on a project about the extinction of languages, and we had just witnessed one member of the community who spoke the language fluently passing away. So that was something really hard. And just to show, I mean, I really do respect Ganymede, and I just want to share a video, a very short clip, letting people know who she was. There you go.
Kusunda, Geni Kusunam, Sienona, 9 वर्षको हुँदाखेरि त्यहाँ बसे थियौँ बाख्राकोट जङ्गलमा राम्रो थियो उहिले त सबै ठुलो बगाल थियो सबै राजा बगाल थिए जङ्गल बस्थे मौली बाजे भनेको टेको न मैले मर लागे मेरो बाछा लोभन लाग्यो अब बच्छ कि भन्ने आशमाया छ त्यही हो बचिदिनुहुन्छ कि भनेर लाग्छ
Yeah, so that was Ganymede Sen, and she had been very, very excited about the project. So that's why when we met her family, they were very, very keen, and the Kusunda community was very keen that we move on with the project and do the project in one way or another. And that's when we ended up, coincidentally meeting Lil Bahadur and Hema, who are now part of the project and are doing the project, are also participating in the project. And as they pay their respects to Ganymede, both of them knew Ganymede and had a very special relationship with her. So that's the genesis of the project. Now a little bit about the technical implementation of the project. We're using photogrammetry to capture the environment in Nepal. So you can see over here, this is a capture of the house, the two huts where Lil Bahadur and Hema, the granddaughter and grandfather, live. It's a beautiful setting in Nepal. You can look at the hills around, and we captured this using drones as well as DSLRs for ground capture. And one reason we did that is to also kind of see, Lil Bahadur and Hema, both of them are very hospitable, and they really did enjoy the time that we spent there. When we visited them, and we thought that it would be great to share that also with a larger audience, and they would want to welcome people to their home and be hospitable. So once again, photogrammetry offers a realistic representation of the surroundings, and that's something that's very interesting for us. One thing over here is also important to mention is the challenges and the beauty of these challenges. For instance, there were, I don't know if we can see it right now, but if you look closer, there were this space. In order to do a photogrammetry scan, you always need some sort of like a static scene to be able to capture it without any artifacts. But documentary making, as a lot of us know, is anything but controlled. So a lot of the times there would be goats walking in these scenes and chickens walking through while we were doing these scans. And we find it beautiful to also let that be, part of the story, and to kind of include that in the storytelling. Because if we try to paint a story or a picture that is polished and that is somehow sanitized and doesn't reflect what actually the reality was, it wouldn't be documentary making in that sense. And we captured, we captured Lil Bahadur and Hema, the granddaughter, using volumetric capture. Now, volumetric capture is really, really difficult when it comes to, if you want to do it really well, it's going to cost you, a lot of money. And also to do it in a remote mountain in Nepal is not the easiest. It's full of challenges. So we were setting up a green screen in the left hut that you see over here in a small space. We took all the equipment up there, and in some ways we are so naive that we think, we want to, capture this really beautiful moment in the life of this language using this high technology or this high tech way of capturing it in order to preserve it. But it's also being, in some ways, if I have to be really critical of myself, it's also not understanding the limitations of the space. So when we set up the green screen, when we plugged everything onto capture and to kind of hit action and roll and do the interview, we blew up the electricity in the village, and had to then end up hiring the village electrician as part of the team to run through the whole production with us. So once again, it was about acknowledging what is possible with this technology, and of course, what is the intent of using this technology, and then be able to also view it quite critically and say, okay, how can we also bring this process into the piece? So I want to play a really special moment in the experience. I want to share it here with you. As part of the project, so Hema is a singer and a composer. And she really wanted to write a song for the project, right? Like as part of the project. So we were very happy for her to take that initiative. And then she did end up composing and writing a song. And we thought initially that she would write a song, you know, as a 15-year-old, you would probably and most likely end up writing a song about your dreams, about, you know, what you aspire to be. And instead, she wrote a song in first person, in her grandfather's words of what his life had been. So she wrote a song in the Kusunda language, a language that, you know, the mother tongue that her grandfather had forgotten. So because he didn't have the words, she wrote it on behalf of him, which was a very beautiful moment that we got to witness when she first read it out, and we captured that in VR or as a volumetric video.
गिलांदै दागै बाले उमेर लड्दैका फेर फुर गिलाङमा म्याकसै काक्से दुखो सुख झेल्दै गिलाङ्गी माट ओइची गिलाङ्गी माट ओइची आक्पे टोक्दा गिलाङमा हाङ्जी झपक्दै भर्छ लड्दै र फुर गिलाङ म्याक्सै काक्चे टोकचोक झेल्दै गिलाङ्गी माट ओइची गिलाङ्गी माट ओइची आक्पे टोक्दा गिलाङमा हाङ्जी झपक बर्ब गिलाङ्गी माट ओइची आक्टे टोक्दा गिलाङमा हाङ्जी झपक डै भर्छ.
Yeah, so I just want to say one more thing about the piece is that before I wrap up the presentation here is the main way to interact within this piece, because it's about language and because it's about a language that is going extinct, is going to be voice-based interactions. So you will be asked to speak certain words in the Kusunda language in order to navigate through the piece. And that's something we worked together also with Hema, is that her ambition really is to learn the language and to teach it. Learn it so well that she wants to then teach it. And for her, it meant something that when a larger audience gets to view the piece, they need to contribute, you know, to the piece, and also, yeah, by lending their voice against this extinction. So, yeah, that's. I had a few other things to speak about, but I'm really eager to hear your questions about this, rather than continue speaking on my own.
So thank you very much to give us insights into that. I was right smiling at myself. A good reason why I rushed in the beginning. So straightforward was that you have enough time in the end to talk widely about your project and your insights. And it was really, thank you very much for going that deep into and to give you this great feedback and inspirational moments, what language does mean to us. And I want to connect my question a little bit with the one of Michaela Kopsamark. She asked early in the beginning, she said, how do men know? This wasn't the one. She said, what are current limitations, challenges you experience with VR journalism? And I think what you said about that language is kind of a window or possibility, and you connect that with the mechanic of how to navigate through the VR experiences is kind of not holding up the limitations we have, but open the borders. So just not thinking about VR as a visual medium, as it is, obviously, but also setting up new limitations and widen it up and open it up. So I think that's a pretty cool mechanic to use for. And as you said, also, challenges are always the technique behind to set up everything, like your example of the fallout of electricity. So how would you describe is your approach into using VR as a journalist? How how it serves VR you with your topics, and how can you break over the limitations we have?
Yeah, I think virtual reality, to be very honest, sometimes I just ask myself, why am I using this medium to do this? It's so hard. But I guess the answer is really to be honest and open about the limitations and about the challenges. As soon as you are, first of all, I think one needs to know that there has been this idea of the documentary maker, of the journalist, trying to be objective. That's an illusion. There is no such thing as an objective documenter or a filmmaker. I think the only ethical way to do it is to expose yourself, to be vulnerable, and to be out there saying that these are the choices I made during the making of this piece, and try and see how you can include it in the making of the piece in order to also expose the limitations of the medium and of the technology. Nobody is paying me money to be a VR creator as such. I'm not here to promote the technology. I'm not here to be a spokesperson for the industry. I'm here to perform my art, my form of storytelling, and to use the technology to take the story further. And so you shouldn't also, I don't shy away from talking about the limitations and the challenges of creating the work within the work itself. So instead of trying to polish up and to create this kind of made up version of this piece, for me, a big learning in the making of this piece, and also learning from one of my previous works, which is Home After War, has been how can you also the making of these pieces, how can they enter the pieces themselves? In film, we call it breaking the fourth wall, right? And I think in film, the technology and the technical capacities are so high that you need to break the fourth wall. Whereas I think when it comes to documentaries and in VR, you wouldn't even call it breaking the fourth wall. I mean, it's just all there. Like, the limitations are just so obvious that it makes no sense to create this illusion of a space that is perfectly manicured in some way. So that's one of the big challenges of VR, is that especially if you're using it as a medium for documenting or as a real documenting real life, it's really important to also show what went into making this piece and what are the questions around it. For example, like the community where we were, like the space that I showed you, it's affected by poverty. And what does it mean as a creator then to kind of bring new technology that is alien to document something, and then how may you tie that into the piece itself? So we have Lil Bahadur, the grandfather, talking about the technology in the piece as well. Calling the drones, he calls the drones eagle vehicles. So stuff like that also makes the audience, a larger audience, also understand what are the implications of them viewing this piece using this technology that then invaded this community to document their culture. So I think that's probably like the only way to do it at this point.
Yes, I totally agree. I guess including the technology into the story itself is a pretty smart approach. For then, because every time you document something, because as a journalist, you may say the greatest asset is the truth. So really documenting what is really happening, what's really ongoing. Like I said, the example of the little pigs and goats just running through the pictures. But at the moment when a camera is pointed on out something, it's not the truth anymore, because people behave different. Like we do at the moment, like when the camera is pointing at us, I always smile the whole time just to look friendly and nice. So people just behave differently. So obviously it's not the truth anymore. So at the moment when we connect to the situation, we change it. So I guess it's pretty smart to get into it. But focusing more about the truth or the approach of a journalist, like I said before, it's more about giving people a voice, or showing them regions or areas or topics we haven't known before. So actually I haven't known Kusunda before, and so that's great. By your project, I get to know more, and I got to know more about the relevance between all things working together. But by editing the story and by adding music to it, you emotionalize in some way, because you want to have an impact. You want to have kind of called empathy. So you have to trigger it somehow. So to put it more controversially, you manipulate in some way. So how does it work together as being a journalist, showing the truth, but also kind of manipulating the people by watching?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting.
Confront you.
Yeah. I think I will need to be confronted. I mean, that's really, really good. It is something that I'm actually thinking so much about these days, especially with this piece, while making Kusunda. And that's part of the reason as well, like this manipulation. How can we not manipulate? For example, initially we had like different versions of the script. In the first version of the script, we had only the version that we thought was relevant, full of information, and about the lives of these people, right? Of Lil Bahadur and Hema. And then we said, okay, this is too polished, and this makes it look like everything is working out fine. And how can we make it real? And that's when we realized, okay, how these moments before the takes, before we start actually recording, we try to bring those elements in. Like making the stuff that you would actually leave out of a documentary into a documentary. And I think that's again when going back to this moment of like trying to break the fourth wall very consciously, trying to break the illusion that the takes that you take into a film is all what happened, which is not the truth, which is never the truth, So it's really also about, I think I'm also kind of moving away from this idea that a VR experience alone can create so much empathy that it may move you to action. It's probably in order to make that happen, it would need to have been the exact right moment at the exact right time that you experienced this VR experience, and then you were probably thinking about language and thinking about something else for a long period in your life, and then this happened, and therefore you change, or something changes in you. It's never one event, but a sequence of events that leads to change, and stories play a really important role in that. And how can we tell stories in the non-manipulative way that they can still inform change is a big question. And I think you can do that. I think you can still do it by not manipulating your audiences you're still manipulating them by making it clear that this is not the illusion. You're breaking the illusion, and by breaking the illusion, you're still creating another kind of illusion. So it's a kind of a crazy inception world that's very hard to break.
But actually I was thinking about, maybe it's just because we all receive our realities in different ways. So my reality looks totally different than yours, But obviously, it's all the same reality. And I'm thinking about, like you mentioned out Inception, it's kind of a fourth dimension we just opened up by virtual reality, because then it's your reality focusing on the reality of another person, like the father in Fallujah, for example, or the one in the Kusunda community, getting into. So it's just like struggling up to. So, but I guess we can discuss about that topic for hours on. I have to watch a little bit light on the clock at the moment, and we're running out of time, but there are still some questions in our chat which are open, and I want to just ask you by now. There was a second question of Michaela, and she asked, how much time does it take to realize your VR project? As you mentioned out, from Kusunda, you work since 2012, 18?
Well, 2012 wasn't. It was the start of an idea, and I guess you can't. I mean, ideas happen all the time, and normally I don't count that as the start of a project, because ideas are cheap. Like making the project is what's, it's that's where the blood, tears, and sweat goes in, and that was starting 2018. So end of 2018. I would say this project, it really depends on the project, how long something takes. Sometimes things just fall into place, and sometimes things don't fall into place. But I would say, I mean, we are also we are an indie small studio, so we can't churn out productions at a pace like a big production studio. So we do maybe 2 productions a year or 2 projects a year, bigger ones, bigger projects, and then the smaller ones. But on an average, the life of a project maybe anywhere between 12 months and to produce a project, maybe 12 to 24 months. Sometimes it takes longer depending on the circumstances. And with documentaries, you never know. Like for this one, we didn't calculate, of course we didn't calculate that our main co-creator Ganimeya would pass away. So thankfully, or we were grateful to then later meet Lil Bahadur and Hema, and that they are now super keen and interested in doing this project as much as Ganimeya was. But that's also pure fortune, pure luck. Yeah, so I'm sorry, Michaela, I don't have like a really clear answer to that. But for us, it takes about 12 to 24 months to realize a project.
So do you have a tip for our audience, and especially for the students out there, how to finance projects like that? Because mentioned in the beginning, it's really important to have kind of corporations ongoing to distribute, but also in the beginning, doing the research, doing travel, technologies, prototyping, because you don't know at the moment how you can handle what kind of material you get out. Is it kind of a tip you have how to go on? Where's the starting point and in way of financing for the students to go to?
I guess don't give up is what I would say if you have a dream, because a lot of the how do I say, like a lot of the times it is so exhausting and it is so tiring to finance a project and to make it work and make your idea come to life, that it's easier to give up. Or maybe it's harder to give up. That's why you don't give up. Yeah, so I think it's you just have to persevere, and it might seem, it's just something that everyone says, like, you keep trying hard and things will happen. But I do really believe in that. I do really believe that you just have to be very, very determined, but also very smart in whom you're approaching for your financing, and first go to the supporter who already supports you. So I would say, like in terms of building up the portfolio of your project, a project has a life and it has a portfolio of its own, right? So the first person who puts their stamp of approval is going to be also the person who has to make the hardest decision. So if that person is convinced of your vision for the project, and this is normally a person who already knows you and who trusts your work. So that's where you should start. And this can be This can be a grantee, this can be someone who says, hey, I can provide a space for you to work, equipment, and so on and so forth, and for that I can give you a letter of support. But that already adds some weight to your project. So start over there and then slowly keep climbing the ladder to make it come true and make it be real. Because it's very beautiful when your vision is realized.
So talking about the vision of your projects, the very last question I can ask, because we're running out of time, is what Anna pointed out. It wasn't me. She said, do you feel like you have to compromise on your vision or the story you want to tell because of the medium of VR you choose?
No, I think you may change the vision. You don't have to compromise, I think, but you may have to compromise the way you tell the story. So I think that if you talk about the vision, I'm understanding it as the big picture. What's the vision, that you're trying to accomplish? And I don't think I compromise on the vision. But I might have to make some tough decisions when it comes to how the final product ends up looking, or how and these are compromises, normally budget-based compromises, because there are, when we talk about compromising on looks or compromising on the technology or compromising on the target audience, it's normally a question of budget. So these are probably compromises that you would end up making also on any other project that you kind of work on. For example, if you have an animated flat film, you might still end up saying, okay, at one point you have to stop working on the animations because you've run out of money. So you do make a compromise over there. The same with documentaries. I think like you might end out like you might run out of budget and you might have to say, okay, we can't continue production right now. We need to get the story out. Or you might have your subjects or your area of work somewhere that you're not able to access now because of COVID or whatever, and then you have to make other compromises. So yeah, to answer your question, you might change the way you tell the story because of the medium, but I don't necessarily compromise on the vision.
That's a great last sentence, actually. Don't compromise on your visions. So, but because the FMX interview sessions are part of the FMX highlight show, we can't miss our great FMX trailers because obviously they are part of every FMX. You every time see them running up in the beginning, and we've chosen a special trailer for our session tonight. It's called Globosome, and maybe you get the reconnection about how worlds connect, how we connect, and have an impact in creating new worlds. So I have the joy to announce the FMX trailer of the year 2012, Globosome, directed by Sasha Gedet. Trailer. So as said, showing the FMX trailer means our show is already over. So the last things I want to say is thank you very much, Gayatri, for giving us very, very interesting insights into your work and your thoughts and how you're keeping the vision up. Thank you for having the time and to chat with us. It was really great and honor having you here.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for having me. It's really nice to be part of this version of FMX as well. It's a pleasure.
And of course, thank you, dear audience. It was a pleasure chatting with you. And thanks for your interesting questions popping up. Thanks a lot too. Ellen Nagley says, we're welcome. So if you have any feedback or suggestions for the next shows coming up, please send it over via email to highlights@fmx.de. We will do our best to integrate it into our upcoming shows. So, and our next online session will be on the 8th of June 2020, where Florian Gallinger, the executive VFX producer at Rise FX, will interview Jeff Wagner, senior technology consultant at SiteFX. So, be there, see you again at the 8th of June, and until then, stay healthy, stay safe, of course. And all I can say by now is thank you very much again at Gayatri, thank you the audience, and thank you the FMX team for setting up everything. I've been here, and I just say bye.